welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. I stood in our kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring at the back of John's head as he unpacked groceries. The overhead light cast a warm glow over the room, contrasting sharply with the cold dread tightening in my chest. My hands were trembling slightly as I summoned the courage to speak. The idea had been simmering for weeks now, ever since Mark suggested it during one of our lunches at work. I think we need a trial separation, I finally blurted out, my voice barely above a whisper. John froze. He didn't drop the bag of oranges he was holding, didn't spin around to shout or demand an explanation. Instead, he set the bag down, turned, and looked me in the eye, his expression calm, almost unnervingly so. "Okay," he said simply, his voice steady and even. I blinked, thrown off by his lack of resistance. I had expected anger, shock, at least some sort of emotional reaction. But no, John just nodded, as if I had suggested we try a new restaurant for dinner. "Okay," I repeated, trying to make sense of his nonchalance. "Yeah," he continued, his face unreadable. "I'll move out tonight. I'll pack a couple of bags. But I have one condition." I stiffened, half expecting him to ask me to beg for forgiveness, to reconsider, to somehow change my mind. But instead, his voice turned cold, steely. "No infidelity," he said, the edge in his tone sharp. "If you so much as think about seeing someone else, this trial separation turns into a real divorce." No questions asked. I stared at him, shocked. The words hung between us, and I could hardly process what was happening. He was leaving. Just like that. "John, wait," I started, my voice trembling. "Can we at least talk about this? I mean, you're just leaving." He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly as he leaned against the counter opposite me. "Samantha, you asked for this. What's there to talk about? You want space, I'm giving it to you. But I didn't think you'd just agree like that," I said, my voice rising in desperation. "I thought we'd, I don't know, discuss it, figure out why I felt this way." His eyes softened for a brief moment before hardening again. "We've been discussing our problems for months, Sam. And here we are. Maybe this is what we need." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I had imagined a heated argument, followed by a tearful reconciliation. Not this cold, clinical agreement. "I don't want you to go," I whispered, my voice breaking. John sighed again, a long, weary sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "Samantha, you can't have it both ways. Either you want this separation or you don't. Make up your mind." Before I could respond, John was already heading upstairs, pulling suitcases from the closet. I stood frozen in place, the kitchen now silent except for the faint sound of a zipper opening. As I heard the sounds of him packing, a rush of memories flooded my mind: our wedding day, the honeymoon in Hawaii, the countless evenings spent cuddling on the couch. Was I really willing to throw all of that away? He came back down, carrying 2 suitcases, his face set in a grim line. "I'll stay at a hotel for now," he said quietly. "We can figure out the logistics later." "John, please," I begged, reaching out to touch his arm. "Don't do this. I don't know what I was thinking." He pulled away, his expression unreadable. "You wanted space, Samantha. And I'm giving it to you. We'll see how this goes." With that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing in the middle of our kitchen, the room suddenly feeling vast and empty. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house, and with it, the weight of what I had set in motion crashed down on me. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around myself, the tears finally spilling over. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I had wanted to make things better, not lose him entirely. As the minutes ticked by and the reality of my situation set in, one thought kept running through my mind: what have I done? It had been barely 48 hours since John walked out of our home with those 2 suitcases. I spent the first night tossing and turning in our empty bed, waiting for the sound of his keys jingling in the lock, hoping he would come back. He didn't. The next day, I went through the motions of my routine, work, errands, making dinner for one, while the silence of the house weighed on me like a heavy blanket. I kept telling myself this was temporary. We needed space, time to figure things out. That's what Mark had told me when he suggested the separation. But the space didn't feel like healing. It felt like a void, and the longer it stretched, the more I regretted everything. On the second evening, I decided to call John. I had to hear his voice, maybe convince him to talk this through properly. As the phone rang, I rehearsed what I would say in my head, trying to sound calm, reasonable, like I hadn't been crying off and on for the past 2 days. Finally, he picked up. "Hey," he answered, his voice smooth and collected. "John, I paused, surprised by how normal he sounded. Not strained, not angry, just casual. "I wanted to talk. About us." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I'm busy right now, Sam," he replied, the tone of his voice shifting slightly, almost detached. "Busy?" I echoed, taken aback. "With what?" "I'm out," he said simply. "Out?" I repeated, confusion twisting in my gut. "Out where?" He hesitated for a beat, and then, just as casually, he said, "I'm having dinner." "With Linda." I froze. "Linda? As in? Linda from your office?" "Yeah," he replied, sounding entirely too calm for my liking. "We're at that new Italian place near the river." I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. Linda was his friend from work, the one I had never thought twice about. She was harmless. Wasn't she? "You're on a date with her?" I asked, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay composed. "I wouldn't call it a date," he said, though there was a slight edge to his voice now. "It's dinner, Sam. Just dinner. We're catching up." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "But we're supposed to be figuring things out, John. Not going out with other women." "You asked for space," he countered, his voice cool and controlled. "I'm giving you space. But that doesn't mean I'm going to sit around waiting for you to make up your mind." My heart dropped. "I didn't ask for this," I muttered, my voice cracking. "I didn't ask for you to start seeing other people." John sighed, and I could picture him sitting across from Linda, probably sipping wine, looking unbothered. "Look, Samantha, I'm not doing anything wrong. You wanted the separation, and I agreed. But you need to understand that I'm not going to put my life on hold while you figure out what you want." I could barely process his words. "But what about what we said? No infidelity. No seeing other people." His tone shifted, firm and unyielding. "I'm not being unfaithful. You're the one who wanted out, remember? I told you I wasn't going to sleep with anyone else, and I meant it. But dinner with a friend? I think I'm allowed that much." The word stung, cutting deeper than I expected. He was so calm, so rational, while I felt like I was spiraling. "So that's it?" I asked, barely managing to hold back the tears. "You just move on like this doesn't mean anything." "I'm not moving on," he said, his voice softening ever so slightly. "But I'm also not waiting around, either. You wanted space, Sam. And I'm respecting that. Maybe it's time you figure out what you really want." I opened my mouth to argue, to plead with him, but the line went quiet for a moment, and then I heard his voice again, quieter now. "Look, I need to go. I'll call you later." Before I could respond, the line clicked, and he was gone. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at my phone, my heart racing and my mind spinning. Linda. He was out with Linda. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just 2 days ago, we were under the same roof. Now, John was sharing dinner with someone else, while I stood here alone, grappling with the mess I had created. Later that night, I sat on the couch, replaying the conversation in my mind over and over again. Every word felt like a fresh cut. I had pushed him away, and now he was drifting farther than I ever expected. Mark had told me that the separation would give me clarity, that stepping away from John would help me realize what I truly wanted. But what I wanted was John, not this version of him, who could easily step out and have dinner with another woman while I sat here alone, my heart slowly breaking. The doorbell rang suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. For a brief, irrational moment, I hoped it was John. Maybe he had come back, realizing this separation was a mistake. Maybe he had seen through Linda, realizing she could never be what I was to him. But when I opened the door, it wasn't John. It was Mark. He stood there with that same easy smile he always wore, leaning casually against the doorframe as if everything in my life wasn't crumbling. "Hey, I thought I'd stop by, see how you're doing," he said, his voice smooth as always. I tried to smile back, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Mark, it's not a great time. I've got a lot on my mind." "I bet," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "But hey, this is exactly why you wanted space, right? To figure things out. You don't need to be stuck in that old routine." His words grated against me in a way they hadn't before. I had once found them reassuring, even comforting. But now, standing here, knowing John was out with Linda, they felt hollow. "Mark, I'm not so sure about that anymore," I admitted, folding my arms across my chest. "I think I made a mistake." Mark raised an eyebrow, leaning against the back of the couch. "A mistake? Come on, Sam. You were miserable. You needed this. You said yourself you wanted time to see things more clearly." "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "John's already seeing someone else. He's out with Linda tonight." A flicker of something crossed Mark's face, surprise, maybe, but he quickly masked it with a shrug. "Well, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it'll help you see that there's more out there for you too." I stared at him, feeling more confused than ever. Was that what I wanted? To move on? To let John slip away and find something, or someone, new? The truth was, I didn't know. But the more I thought about John with Linda, the more the idea of space felt like a mistake I couldn't undo. The house felt empty in a way it never had before. Every room, every corner echoed with memories of John. His favorite coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter, and his worn leather jacket hung on the back of a chair in the hallway. I had told myself that a trial separation would help me gain clarity, but after 2 days of silence and the crushing weight of John moving on so easily with Linda, I felt more lost than ever. It was Mark's voice I heard in my head, repeating the same words he had been telling me for weeks. "You're too good for him, Sam," Mark had said that afternoon over lunch, his eyes sincere as he leaned in across the table. "You deserve better. Someone who sees you, appreciates you." I had believed him then. Mark, with his easy charm and confident demeanor, always knew what to say. He made me feel understood in a way John hadn't in months. But now, sitting alone in the quiet of our home, my home now, I supposed, I realized how wrong I had been. I grabbed my phone, scrolling back through old messages between John and me. There were moments of warmth, messages that reminded me of who we used to be before the distance crept in. And then, further back, I found the texts from Mark. His words were subtle, but they were there, the slow, persistent suggestion that I deserved something more, someone better. Someone like him. The realization hit me hard. I hadn't made this decision on my own. I had let someone else, someone outside of my marriage, influence me. I had let Mark push me into this separation, convincing myself that it was what I needed. But now, as I sat alone in the empty house, the echoes of my choice reverberating through the walls, I realized that what I wanted wasn't space. It was John. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I dialed his number. After a few rings, he picked up. "Hello." John's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable coolness to it now. "John, it's me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to worry that he would hang up. What's there to talk about, Sam? He finally replied, his tone cautious. I thought you wanted space. I'm giving you space. I made a mistake, I said quickly, before he could brush me off. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't think it through. I've been confused, and I let someone else get into my head. Mark. John cut in, his voice sharp now. What does Mark have to do with this? I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of my words. He was the one who kept pushing me, telling me I needed space, that I deserved more. I let him influence me, and now I think I've lost you because of it. The silence on the other end was deafening, and I waited, my heart pounding, wondering if I had said too much, too late. I see, John finally said, his voice clipped. So this was Mark's idea. You didn't come to this conclusion on your own. No, I mean, yes, I stammered, trying to explain. I did feel like we were drifting apart, but I didn't think it through. I was listening to him, and I shouldn't have. John, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize what I had until you were gone. He sighed heavily on the other end, and I could almost picture him running a hand through his hair the way he did when he was frustrated. Samantha, we've been drifting for months. This didn't just happen because of Mark. We've been having problems for a long time, and you were the one who asked for space. I know, I said, my voice breaking. I know, and I regret it. I don't want space. I want to fix this. I want to fix us. John didn't respond right away, and I could feel the tension building in my chest, the fear that he was too far gone, that he had already moved on with Linda. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but distant. I don't know, Sam, he said quietly. I don't know if we can fix this. Later that evening, I sat in the living room, replaying our conversation over and over again. His words haunted me. I don't know if we can fix this. I knew I had to talk to someone, to get some clarity, and for better or worse, I called Mark. Hey, he answered, his voice as smooth and casual as always. How are you holding up? Not great, I admitted, leaning back on the couch. I talked to John. There was a pause, and I could hear the shift in Mark's tone when he spoke again. And? How did that go? Not well, I said, biting my lip. He's seeing someone else. Linda. Mark let out a low, dismissive chuckle. Linda? Really? I never saw that coming. Yeah, I replied, my voice flat. I didn't either. But that's not the point. The point is, I think I've made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have listened to you. What do you mean? Mark's voice hardened slightly, his casual demeanor slipping. I let you talk me into this, I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. All those times you told me I deserved better, that I needed space, I thought you were helping me, but now I see that you were just pushing me in a direction I didn't need to go. Mark's silence stretched for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but defensive. Samantha, I was just looking out for you. You were unhappy. I could see it. You told me yourself that things weren't working with John. Yeah, I was unhappy, I snapped, my anger growing. But that doesn't mean I needed to throw everything away. I should have talked to John, worked on our problems, not run from them. I can't believe I let you influence me like that. Mark sighed, and I could sense his frustration now. Sam, I didn't make you do anything. You made your own decision. I was just being a friend. A friend? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. No, Mark. You weren't just being a friend. You were pushing me towards something you wanted. There was another pause, and then Mark's voice lowered, the smoothness gone. So what now, Sam? You're blaming me for everything. You think going back to John is going to magically fix everything? I don't know, I admitted, my voice softening. But I do know that listening to you was a mistake. I need to make things right with John. Mark let out a bitter laugh. Good luck with that. But don't say I didn't warn you. You deserve better than this. I hung up, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders but a new one settle in its place. For the first time in weeks, I saw things clearly. This wasn't about Mark. This was about John and me, and I was the only one who could fix what I had broken. The realization hit me with full force: if I didn't act soon, I might lose John forever. And this time, I wasn't going to let someone else tell me what to do. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in weeks. I had spent the night going over everything, every conversation, every moment of doubt, every mistake I had made. And I knew what I needed to do. I had to face John, not over the phone, not through text, but face to face. It was the only way I could be honest with him, the only way to fix the damage I had caused. But first, I needed to see Mark. Our last conversation still weighed heavily on me, and there were things left unsaid that I couldn't ignore. He had been more than a friend, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he had wanted me to drift away from John for reasons beyond simple concern. I needed closure. That afternoon, I drove to the office where Mark and I both worked. It was Saturday, so the building was mostly empty, but I knew he'd be there. He often spent weekends catching up on work, and I had texted him earlier, telling him we needed to talk. When I entered the office, the sterile smell of coffee and paper greeted me, along with the low hum of computers. Mark was sitting at his desk, typing away, but when he saw me, he leaned back in his chair and smiled, that familiar, confident smile that used to make me feel reassured. Now, it made my stomach churn. "Hey," he said casually, as if our conversation the night before hadn't left a crack between us. "What's up? You here to get some work done?" "No," I replied, my voice steady but firm. "We need to talk. About everything." Mark frowned slightly, sensing the shift in my tone. "Okay," he said slowly, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his desk. "Talk." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized something. You were more involved in my decision to separate from John than I realized at the time." Mark raised an eyebrow, looking almost amused. "Come on, Sam. You can't seriously be blaming me for your relationship problems." "I'm not blaming you for everything," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I'm saying that you influenced me, more than a friend should have. You kept telling me I deserved better, that I needed space. And I let that get into my head." Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Samantha, I wasn't lying. You were miserable, and I was trying to help you see that. You're better than what you were settling for, and that's where you're wrong," I shot back, my voice rising slightly. "I wasn't settling. John and I had problems, sure, but I should have been working through them with him, not listening to you. You were pushing me to give up on my marriage, and now I realize why." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing, just stared at me, waiting for me to continue. "You wanted me, didn't you?" I asked, my voice quieter now but no less firm. "This wasn't just about helping me. You wanted me to leave John because you had feelings for me." Mark didn't deny it. Instead, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, as if the weight of his own actions was finally hitting him. "Look, maybe I got too involved. Maybe I wanted you to see that there was something better out there. Someone who appreciated you more than John ever did." I shook my head, disappointment flooding through me. "That's not your place, Mark. It's not up to you to decide what's best for me, and it's definitely not your job to push me away from my husband." For the first time, Mark's cool demeanor faltered. He stood up, walking toward me, his eyes pleading. "Sam, I was just trying to help you. You're too good for him. You deserve someone who..." "Who what, Mark?" I interrupted, stepping back. "Someone like you. This isn't about you. This is about me and John, and I'm not going to let you, or anyone else, get in the way of that anymore." He stopped, his hand falling to his side as he realized I wasn't going to be swayed. His face hardened, but there was a flicker of something else, defeat, maybe. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "But don't come crying to me when it doesn't work out." "I won't," I said, turning toward the door. "Goodbye, Mark." As I walked out of the office, I felt a sense of closure, like a weight had been lifted. Mark was no longer the voice in my head. Now, there was only one person I needed to talk to, John. I arrived at John's new apartment later that evening, my heart racing as I stood outside his door. I had called ahead, asking him to meet in person, and to my surprise, he had agreed. But I knew this wouldn't be easy. He had already started moving on, and I didn't know if he would even want to hear what I had to say. The door opened, and there he was, standing in the doorway, looking as calm and collected as ever. But there was something different about him now, an air of distance, of finality. "Samantha," he said, his voice steady. "Come in." I stepped inside, the small apartment feeling foreign and unfamiliar, so unlike the home we had shared for years. He motioned for me to sit on the couch, and I did, feeling the tension settle between us. "What do you want to talk about?" he asked, sitting across from me, his arms crossed. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly. "I came here to apologize, John. For everything. For asking for the separation, for pushing you away. I made a huge mistake, and I didn't realize it until it was too late." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Go on." I swallowed hard. "I let Mark influence me. He kept telling me I deserved better, that I needed space from you. And I listened to him. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I see that I wasn't. I should have fought for us, not run away." John's eyes softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "Samantha, this isn't just about Mark. We've been drifting apart for a long time. You asked for space because you weren't happy, and that didn't just come from him." "I know," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "I know we've had problems. But I didn't give us a real chance. I let someone else's opinion cloud my judgment, and now I'm terrified that I've lost you." He sighed, leaning back against the chair, his face thoughtful. "I'm not going to lie, Sam. This separation, it's been hard, but it's also made me realize a few things." I held my breath, waiting for the words that would either break me or give me hope. "I love you," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I always have. But I don't know if we can go back to the way things were. Too much has changed." Tears spilled down my cheeks, and I wiped them away quickly. "I don't want to go back to the way things were. I want to be better. I want us to be better." John looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "And how do we do that, Sam? How do we move forward after all of this?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to try." He was silent for a long moment, and then, finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said softly. "We'll try. But this time, it's going to take real work." I nodded, relief flooding through me. "I'm ready for that." As we sat there in the quiet of his apartment, the distance between us slowly shrinking, I realized that this confrontation, as hard as it had been, was the first step toward healing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The weeks following my confrontation with Mark and reconciliation with John were filled with a sense of uncertainty, but also a flicker of hope that hadn't been there for months. John and I weren't trying to rush things or sweep our problems under the rug. Instead, we agreed to confront them together, head on. We decided to meet regularly, twice a week, to talk. No distractions, no phones, just the two of us in the open space between us. It was awkward at first, sitting across from each other in silence, each of us waiting for the other to speak. But we soon found a rhythm, a safe place where we could be honest about our feelings without fear of judgment. And slowly, that openness began to heal the wounds we had caused each other. One of our first conversations took place at a small park near John's apartment. The autumn leaves had started to change colors, filling the air with a crispness that felt almost cleansing. We sat on a bench, our coats wrapped tightly around us, sipping coffee from the local cafe. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," John began, breaking the silence between us. His voice was calm but serious, and I could tell he had been preparing for this conversation. About how you felt like I wasn't present anymore. That I wasn't really there for you. I looked down at my cup, the steam rising and swirling in the chilly air. Yeah. It felt like we were living separate lives, even though we were still together. You were always so busy with work, and I was, well, I guess I was looking for connection elsewhere. I hesitated, then added, I felt invisible, John. John's expression softened, and he nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. I wasn't trying to make you feel that way. But I see it now. I got caught up in work, in everything else, and I didn't realize I was pushing you away. I should have said something sooner, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Instead, I just let the distance grow, and then, well, you know the rest. John leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he stared at the ground. I wish I'd noticed. I wish I'd been more aware of what was going on. But Sam, you have to know, none of this was easy for me either. When you asked for the separation, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I know, I said, the guilt tightening in my chest. And I'm sorry. I handled it all wrong. He looked up at me, his eyes full of sincerity. We both did. But we're here now, and I think that means something. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the conversation settle. Then, after a few breaths, I reached out and took his hand. It felt familiar, but there was a new sense of purpose in the way we held on to each other now, as if we both understood how fragile things had become, and how much effort it would take to hold it all together. Over the next few weeks, we continued to navigate the difficult waters of rebuilding our relationship. There were good days, days where we laughed together, reminiscing about the early years of our marriage. And there were bad days, where old wounds were reopened, and it felt like we were back at square one. But the difference now was that we were both committed to working through it, together. We started seeing a couples therapist, which was John's suggestion. At first, the idea made me nervous, but after our first session, I realized how much we needed it. The therapist helped us communicate in ways we hadn't before, and it felt like we were rediscovering who we were as individuals, as well as who we could be as a couple. One evening, after a particularly emotional therapy session, we found ourselves back at John's apartment, sitting on the floor by the coffee table, a bottle of wine between us. The conversation had been intense, dredging up past resentments and frustrations, but it had also been cathartic. I feel like we're tearing everything apart just to put it back together again, John said, taking a sip of wine. He looked at me with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. Do you think we're strong enough to get through this? I don't know, I said honestly, swirling my glass in my hand. But I think we're stronger now than we were before. We're not pretending everything's fine. We're actually talking. That has to count for something, right? He smiled, a small, tired smile, but it reached his eyes. Yeah, it does. There was a pause, and then I set my glass down, turning to face him fully. John, I want to say something. I know we've both made mistakes, and I'm not asking for us to forget what happened. But I want you to know that I'm committed to this. To us. I don't want to live in the past anymore. He met my gaze, his expression serious. Neither do I. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. I've realized that commitment isn't just about staying when things are good. It's about sticking around when everything is falling apart, too. And I wasn't there for you when things got hard. I ran away. But I'm not going to do that again. I promise. John didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. I believe you, he said softly. And I'm committed to this too. To us. I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm not going anywhere. The words hung in the air between us, a silent agreement, a vow that, despite everything we had been through, we were both willing to do the work, to put each other first again. A few weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, John and I sat in the kitchen of the house we had once shared, drinking coffee and flipping through old photo albums. We hadn't fully moved back in together yet, but we were taking things slowly, one step at a time. This morning felt different, though. It felt like we were finally getting back to a place where we could see a future together. John pointed at a photo of us from years ago, laughing as he recalled the story behind it. Remember this? The time we got lost in that tiny town on our road trip? You were so mad at me for not asking for directions. I smiled, shaking my head. I wasn't mad. I was just frustrated. You were mad, he teased, nudging me gently. But then we found that little diner with the amazing pie, and suddenly you weren't mad anymore. I laughed, the sound coming easily now. Yeah, that pie was worth getting lost for. As we flipped through more photos, the memories flooding back, I realized how far we had come. We were still rebuilding, still learning how to trust each other again, but for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Later that day, as we stood in the kitchen making dinner together, John turned to me and said, "You know, I think we're going to be okay." I looked up at him, my heart swelling with a warmth that felt like home. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I think we are." And in that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we were ready to face them together. This time, it wasn't about running away or pushing each other aside. It was about staying, even when things got hard. It was about commitment, real commitment, the kind that doesn't waver when tested, but grows stronger. This time, we weren't just hoping for a happy ending. We were building one day at a time.